Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Wistran, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Kennan Institute. Thank you. Thank you for joining us for a discussion of After Václav Havel, From Theater to Social Activism in Eastern Europe and Russia. Before I introduce our guest, I'd like to remind you that you can stay up to date on the Kennan Institute's activities by visiting the Kennan Institute's website and subscribing to our blogs and podcasts and other publications. I'd also like to take a moment to thank the Department of State's Title VIII program for its generous support of a number of the Kennan Institute's fellowships. These fellowships allow us to support rising scholars in the field, including today's guest, Dr. Susanna Weygandt. Dr. Susanna Weygandt is a Title VIII early career scholar with the Kennan Institute and a visiting assistant professor of Russian at Sewanee University of the South. Dr. Weygandt received her PhD from Princeton University's Department of Slavic Languages and Literatures. Her research focuses on performance theories indigenous to Russia and Eastern Europe, and her research has appeared in a number of peer-reviewed journals, as well as her co-edited Russian New Drama and Anthology, which was published in 2019. After Susanna speaks, there's going to be a question and answer period. For our online audience, if you'd like to ask a question, you may submit your question in one of three ways: via email to kennan@wilsoncenter.org, via Twitter @Kennan Institute, or via Facebook. And please remember to include your name and affiliation when doing so. Finally, today's discussion is being recorded. So with that, Susanna, please.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, and for moderating today. Thank you, Lenny, for all of your assistance. So today I am going to say a couple of words about my forthcoming book, and then I'm going to mainly focus on the main project that I have been working on as a fellow at the Kennan Institute. And my project explains some of the cultural rifts dividing the region. And my project today helps us understand more about contemporary politics, and in particular cultural politics in Russia and in East Europe. So to begin, new drama, or Novaya drama, it's the topic of my book. It's a vibrant movement of directors and playwrights who have been gathering since the late 90s, gathering at festivals such as Lyubimovka in order to talk about new directions for theater and drama in the 21st century. Some playwrights perhaps you might have heard of, Ivan Voropayev, and there are others who are prolific in the movement and who are gaining international fame, Mikhail Dortnikov, for instance. And in my research for this project, one of my main questions that has been guiding me is, well, with so many dramas being produced since the early 2000s, late 1990s, what can they teach us about life in post-Soviet Russia? Answering that question is actually one of the main trends or tendencies of the movement, and that is known as docudrama or documentary drama. And according to this style of playwriting, the playwright conducts interviews with people of marginalized social groups, such as, for instance, migrant workers from Central Asia who are looking for work in Moscow. And then those interviews become the crux of the dramas. The artistry that the playwright is using and developing involves montaging these interviews into a play. And a lot of the editing and montage is about stimulating the audience's ability to form their own opinion about the social topic presented in the play. So what I'll do now is I will show an excerpt from what I consider to be a quintessential documentary drama coming from Russia. It was written by Yelena Gremina and Mikhail Ugarov, who founded the flagship documentary drama theater in Moscow. It's called Teatr Dok, and that was founded in 2002. This is a play in response to a very important and political event that is still remembered today. The play is called September Dok, and it was made in response to the Beslan tragedy in September 2004, when children and teachers in a school in North Ossetia were killed by Chechen militants and subsequent Russian counter-terrorist intervention. Given the sensitive nature of the topic, Gremina and Ugarov had to think carefully how to make a play about this. And so what they did in the end is they decided to look at editorials, newspapers, blogs on the internet that have people's opinions about this event. And so then they created a play that was a montage of different opinions. And essentially, the outcome of the play shows two different sides of this historical event. One is sympathetic towards Chechnya, the other is sympathetic towards Russia. But the playwright does not sort of point the finger of blame at anyone or come up with a solution. Instead, the burden of responsibility of deciding what to do, what is the root of this, is shifted onto the audience. And that is through this formal technique known as igrovой mechanism, when the playwrights are trying to show two different sides of a political issue. And by putting sort of some of the solution-making efforts onto the audience, then it sort of creates this immersive type of theater. And so my goal for my platform that I'm going to show to you today is to not just put information from my book online, but rather the goal is to situate Russian documentary drama within the broader spectrum of theater for social change, in Ukraine, to show the collaboration between Teatr Dok, for instance, and Theater of Displaced People, which is a Ukrainian documentary theater, and also to show the connection between Teatr Dok, for instance, and Belarus Free Theater, which is also a documentary theater. Okay, so I will now show you my platform. It is called Transnational Documentary Drama and Transformation of East Europe, 1989 to the present. The platform has multiple goals and a layered argument. It shows that Russian docudrama is a humanitarian project and always has been since the early 2000s. It also shows the peaceful collaborations between these artists and playwrights at the Russian flagship theater Teatr Dok, and at documentary theaters such as Theater of Displaced People in Ukraine, and also at Belarus Free Theater. It's a proper digital humanities project because it does more than just a website. It has a unique collection, and also it allows for collaboration. There's a search engine in it, and in addition, it's also using media and technology in order to put forth an argument. And essentially, my argument is that this type of theater should be considered as consequential as protests are, or at least there is a very strong link between the goals of drama on this site and the goals of recent protests in the region. In addition, there are exit polls, and I'll talk more about that, with audience members who have seen some of these performances. And what the exit polls show is that these audiences are transformed after the performances, and that this is a type of theater that is really a gateway to social activism. Okay, so now we will go to the site. Here we are. And I'll just pause and ask if folks online are able to see as I scroll through the site. And as I scroll, what I want to show is that there is, in fact, a lot of information on the front page of the site. And then one can sort of click on different categories and find more information. But basically, I want to describe to you the logic of the flow of material. So it goes from the sort of an archive of translations of essential docudramas, then to a a category that holds videos of performances, both in Ukraine, Russia, and also in Belarus, 2 interviews with the artists themselves. And then I'm looking also at performance that is outside of the frame of the stage, that is performance art that can take place in the streets. And here, I'll talk more about this crucial component, will be exit polls that show how the audience is activated by these performances. And then I move to the protests themselves, because my overall argument is that this theater and performance art creates a gateway to social activism. Also in my mission statement, I have a quote by Slavoj Žižek. He is speaking about performance artists in some of his dialogue with artists from Pussy Riot. He wrote, "Protest art and punk are actually more effective than the protests themselves." And this is in this region, particularly in Russia. So that's a very bold claim. And it's one that I've been keeping in mind, as I curate my material to put forth my argument. I'll just go into this one section about the plays, and basically I have so far 5 translations. I want to get to about 7 or 8, and this is not to compete with any anthologies that are out there. It's to put at least one play by some of the most prolific Russian docudramatists out there, in order so that theater practitioners can learn about these artists. And I also would like that anthropologists and political scientists, that they stumble across my digital archive online, and that they also see these plays, because these plays are providing insights into life in post-Soviet Russia. I've translated some of them. A few of my upper-level language students have translated them, which is a great activity, because these plays, they are showing students of Russian and East European studies what Russia and East Europe is actually like through the eyes of people of different ethnic and marginal social groups. About the topics, for instance, there is one, Novaya Antigona, which is actually the sequel to September Doc. It was written recently, and it's about some of the families who lost their children in the tragedy. Many of the mothers felt that Putin had not done enough to bring justice to what happened, and so the mothers protested. And unfortunately, the mothers were arrested for protesting and asking for more justice. And so what the site does is it basically is following sort of a goal of Russian docudrama to bring attention to those issues that state-sponsored media will not cover. So now I'll move to, this is the category that will hold videos of the performances, helpful for people who cannot go to this area right now, to be able to see these important performances, and it's an archive that preserves them. One can't talk about documentary drama in Ukraine without mentioning Natalia Varashpit. She is prolific. She's the co-director also of, in addition to writing dozens and dozens of dramas, she's the co-director of Theater of Displaced People, which had been operating in Kiev until 2018. And I have some information here about a film that is based on her drama, Bad Roads, and she actually directed the film as well. And that is about life, particularly in the Donbas area in 2019 and 2020. Even though officially on the international scale, a war had not been announced yet, many still think that there had been a war there. And so I have rights to publish part of that play, and I have the rights to publish another play that is about about Ukraine, particularly after 2014. And then moving forward, I also have information about docudrama in Belarus. This is a docudrama performance that is about the protest there in 2011, and the performance brings attention to many of the human rights abuses that were happening in that 2011 protest. And very soon I will be uploading a play by Andrei Korejcik, who gave me permission to use his play. He actually worked, he's a playwright, he worked for the oppositional party of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, and so he was also a part of politics and also the protests in 2020. And so I'll be posting his play Insulted Belarus, which is about the 2020 protests in Belarus. Okay, so now I'm going to show two more categories before giving some historical information. I'm going to move to this, really crucial category, and I need to say a couple words about what I mean by exit polls. So at Teatr Doc and at many docudrama theaters, there's this really interesting component that is a Q&A after a performance, a Q&A between the audience and the actors and the director. And it's an opportunity after the performance for audience members to talk about the social problem that has been represented on stage. And many of these Q&As are actually recorded, and so I'm actually going through right now about 100 recordings, and there's fascinating information. I mean, there's information when audience members talk about, oh, let's get a petition together and let's circulate a letter and send it to the government. Here, there's an upcoming protest. Let's go to it. And so I want to upload some excerpts from those in order to show how audiences are activated by these particular performances. And I would even say that, some of these basement theaters are becoming sort of a haven for the politically aware middle class. And also, whereas at a protest, some might feel scared, or, their thoughts are limited to what goes on one sign. In these basement theaters, audiences can fully express themselves, and they can find allies who share their viewpoints. So in this section, I'm trying to show that a democratic community has been formed in a supportive way underground. And then I'll go to one last category where I go to the protests themselves. May 6, 2012. This was really one of the largest protests that happened in Russia, and it happened in response to Putin's announcing his unconstitutional third term. Euromaidan, many of us are aware of the powerful implications of those pivotal protests in 2013, 2014. Gezi Park, this was huge back in 2013. 3 million took to Gezi Park in order to rally around the protection of that park and to rally around other environmental issues in Istanbul. And Teatr Doc, they created a docudrama about that protest. And then 2020, we have the largest anti-government protests in Belarus's history. So this is where my digital project takes a historical and theoretical approach. Arguably, the protests of 2012 to the present day in the region can be considered echoes of the mass street protests in East Europe in the late 1980s. For instance, in Kiev in the late 80s, there was a strong homegrown independence movement, and its echoes were heard on Maidan Square in 2013 and today in the motivation that the Ukrainian army has. Now, however, the middle class across Europe is even more politically active than it was at the fall of the Soviet Union. Many of the docudramas on the digital archive are literal echoes of protests of the 2010s and the 2020s. Docudramas are either about those protests or about the specific social problems that cause protesters to rally. The connection between the social goals behind docudrama and the social goals behind street protests is central to my platform's argument about docudrama and theater for social change being a gateway to social activism. Thus, my archive is engaged in the current moment, but anchored to a long history of dissent. But I want to push it further. And as I edit this and populate it with even more material over this summer, and particularly in this section on 1989 and after 89, can my platform echo Slavoj Žižek? Punk and performance art are more effective than protests in this region. Can this countercultural movement of outdoor performance art and underground basement theaters move into the place of massive protests when it's becoming so dangerous to protest, in order to be a catalyst for real social change? We know, like George Kennan knew, that Russia didn't develop like countries of Western democracies, and it probably will never develop into such a model. So protests rarely have immediate consequences on legislation in Russia and Belarus. They bring awareness to issues of the importance of voting, for instance, but on the topic of immediate consequences in this particular region, there are problems in tracking the effect of them. At the same time, the Russian and Belarusian governments are scared of Teatr Dok and Belarus Free Theater. And this is because in East Europe, in Russia, theater has always been a very powerful tool and has been used as a sort of loudspeaker to influence people. And so the social message in these docudrama plays do resonate. And here I'd like to allude to Václav Havel, the Czech playwright and political dissident. His best-known play, The Memorandum, written in 1965, critiques life under a totalitarian political system. He wrote plays for decades in the 70s, 80s, as well as in the 90s, and at the same time, he was always involved in political events, very much like some of my guys on this site, the Russian docudramatists, for instance, Mikhail Tortnikov, and even Ivan Verpayev has been involved in political events while writing dramas. In November of '89, Havel became the leading figure in Prague's civic forum that pressed for democratic reforms. This is known as the Velvet Revolution. In '89, he became president and ruled as the president of the Czech Republic until 2003. So don't mess with playwrights. Fast forward, when Putin came to power, one of the first things he did was to pass a law making most theaters controlled by the government. However, places like Teatr Dok have been one of the few who have been functioning as independent theaters. I can say that the Russian government is intimidated by such theaters as Teatr Dok because at least twice it has invested its forces into investigations of Teatr Dok and shutting it down. And you can shut it down, and Teatr Dok will inevitably, even within a few weeks, if not 1 or 2 months, find another basement. So theater is not just fringe in Russia. It's always been considered to be a form of media that has a huge influence on people's thinking. I hope to show eventually that docudrama for social change is a powerful tool, one that might even be more effective than protests in causing change, but I recognize it's a bold claim. In the meantime, I continue to find in interviews with playwrights and in the recordings of exit polls at Teatr Dok performances, exit polls at Belarus Free Theater, and at exit polls at Ukraine Theater of Displaced People, statements by audiences indicating that change is happening at the individual level. Going back to September Dok, the audience comes to a show with their own prejudices and personal biases. What happens when they're confronted with another perspective they hadn't considered, or with the other? Troubling participatory art, such as September Dok, facilitates a process through which audiences gain insight into the other. we begin to see the philosophical thoughts of Emmanuel Levinas come to life. Levinas believed that the other, and he wrote it with a capital O, was something to celebrate. For one, all of our concepts about how to live start by acknowledging that we must engage with people who are different than ourselves. Rather than looking for communality, we should recognize that another person is a universe of mystery and something to fill us with awe, care, and concern. He wrote about that in his collected philosophical papers. Certainly, this open thinking, open mind thinking, can shift biases. Docudrama, particularly in Russia, adopts this understanding of a broader awareness of another person's universe, which can only lead to a decrease in ethnic biases and, in turn, less discrimination that marginalized ethnic and social groups face. So to conclude, if you want to know what the social condition really is like in Russia, as well as to find people like Václav Havel or Yelena Gremina, who have been fighting for human rights while living under authoritarian regime, please look towards the brick interior wall of basements such as Teatr Dog, and if you can't go there, my platform will show you this major underground movement that is operating outside of state power. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Susanna. This was just such a comprehensive talk, and the fact that we've actually got the visuals right here for everyone to see this huge, immense project that you've done. I want to remind, we're going to transition to questions, so a quick reminder for our online audience. Please submit questions, and you've got through 3 ways you can do it, through email, through Twitter, or through Facebook. So any of those 3 mechanisms. Well, we're starting to get some questions coming in, and we'll have, obviously, from our live audience, too. I want to ask you one question to start with. And you mentioned, you kind of underscored a couple times how it's particular to this region, right? And so one question I have for you is kind of the cause and effect. Is it the medium that developed first, and did it develop that way because of the environment it's in, or did the environment give rise to the medium? Why is it particular, this medium in this environment?
I mean, I think that's a great question, and it certainly is particular to the environment. I mean, there's a long history of being forced to write according to paradigms under the Soviet Union. And, you know, for instance, Lyudmila Petrushevskaya, writing in the 80s, she could capture some of the problems, the economic problems that were affecting families in the 80s, but she could never point the finger of blame at anyone specific because that was still when there was an official censure. So after, you know, after the late 80s and into the early 90s, it was this release to finally use theater in order to speak directly about social problems. And then sort of going into more historically, there were some very interesting collaborations between the Royal Court Theatre in the UK, in London, that had been doing interesting work with verbatim theater and some of the dramatists whom I discussed. And so that was sort of a workshop and learning environment so that the playwrights in Russia could learn new techniques for this type of style of playwriting. It just sort of filled that gap, or that, you know, long-time desire to finally speak directly about social issues. And then sort of more broadly, the new drama movement that I talked about in the beginning is mainly about formal experiments in playwriting. And that had begun through mainly artistic playwriting. And then it had been working and developing sort of in parallel to this rising movement of docudrama. And basically, by around 2004 and 2005, this docudrama movement actually sort of became engulfed in new drama, and it became the main subgenre of new drama.
No, that's fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions? Yes, sir.
just a immediate request. This has been a marvelous talk, and I think I'm convinced, and even the overheads look great. Would you be able to give some Russian, first place, is your own book going to be translated into Russian, and some Russian language sources that I might be able to hand to friends whose, I mean, most of them can read English, but
Absolutely.
they don't necessarily
Absolutely.
read it by choice.
Yes, and there's on my site there isn't a particular built-in technology that translates from Russian, because those are never really that
I
great.
was saying the other way around.
But exactly. So the goal of my site is to include both the original of these plays next to a sort of like handmade translation of them.
Yeah, but would you also have some of the explanatory text? Because I think, again, I'm thinking for Russian-speaking people I know, most of whom are elderly emigres, that if they had the context would also be a key inspiration for them to actually go to the individual creations. Good, thank you.
And not just Russian as well. My goal is to also keep, if it's a play written by a Ukrainian playwright, to have her play in the Ukrainian next to an English translation.
Excellent. Other questions?
That's this is one you already have on yours.
It is, and so if you go to the section, I'm not sure if I'm able to scroll backwards to it, but oh, there we go. Yeah, just go to the category on Russian docudrama, and then I have some originals there. You just click on the button. But then likewise, also there are
That article in Voprosy.
yeah, and then you go to manifestos, and these I think most of them are in Russian, and by the end of the summer I should have.
Manifestos, that would be useful, and
Well, thank
you've
you-
given me the answer that I needed.
Thank you so much for your question.
I will do my homework as well as try to get an actual hard copy of.
But I
your,
also wanted to use this
receive
opportunity
Wisconsin
to sort of walk
Thank you.
walk people through the site as well.
No, and I think it is because it's easy enough to hand someone a link, but you've actually shown people how to go through it. And this is an excellent question. It's like someone utilizing it and asking a follow-on.
And also, I mean, some of this material, it's kind of, some is on the Theater Talk website, other it's my own personal archive, other it's the personal archive of some of the audiences, of the playwrights. So it's kind of scattered all over the place naturally. And you know, a lot of work has been not only technical work, but also getting permissions and rights to hold this in one place, one platform that has this unique collection.
Excellent. Other questions people have? Yes, Joe.
So is there any tie-in to any emigre Russian playwrights or Ukrainian playwrights producing works abroad?
Yeah, so let's just, as a matter of fact, I was just so grateful to have this opportunity to interview Mikhail Dordenkov at the podcasting studio here recently, and he's just a prolific writer. He has been the host of Lyubimovka New Drama Festival for at least 8 years, and he's sort of like the frontman of New Drama, and iconic, and his plays are iconic. And due to the political circumstances right now, he and his family have left Russia, and they are in Finland, and he had an opportunity to teach at the University of Maryland. And his plans are to go back to Finland, and then to eventually, his wife is a stage designer, eventually to sort of angle themselves into the theater world in Berlin. But meanwhile, he has written at least 2 plays during his residency in Maryland. And I would say that he's developed his niche. His plays are well received by audiences. 3 of them were performed in Washington, D.C., some in Russian, some in English, because there is such an international community here. And if I may, you know, there's a particular play I could say a couple words about that he wrote recently, and he's sort of from the position of immigration. He's looking back at Russia, and one play that the theater in Tallinn, Estonia, commissioned him to write was actually about Eisenstein's experience creating Ivan the Terrible. And this was a difficult situation, and Dortchenkov looked at documentary material about it because Eisenstein wanted to say one thing about who Ivan Grozny was, and Stalin wanted the film to depict Ivan Grozny another way. And so there was this delicate sort of way that Eisenstein made the film to eventually fulfill the commission from Stalin, but to still express his own artistic creativity and truth. And it's very much sort of how this is a play that Dortchenkov wrote recently, because it's very much like how he was feeling still writing in Russia after 2022. That he couldn't always speak directly about things, and it was difficult for him as a playwright to both express true artistry and the truth after 2022. And so he left Russia in March of 2022.
Thank you.
I may be off because I do Hungary, and so what the Hungarians have done is, what Orban has done is create alternatives to alternative theater and then squash them financially. You're talking about theater in basements, and so that brings me back to the pre-89 period and the Samizdat literature. And so in the Kadar period in Hungary, everything was published. Nobody was censored. So anyone could, it was easier to publish there than here. But 3 copies, one to you, one to the closed section of the library, and one to your boss. But there was mimeograph. And then when mimeograph, they didn't worry about that because it only reaches the audience that is already, that group of people who would read it anyway or know about it anyway. You have to be in the in-group. And that's what these theaters sound like to me.
It's becoming
But Václav Havel ended up in theaters that spoke to large groups. And so with the Samizdat literature, when Soros brought in the Xerox machines, then all of a sudden the literature was available to everyone. So what your website could be that thing, maybe, but it has to have the play itself, not just the words. It has to actually have a performance.
Yes.
You need to, if you're going to get real audiences to actually get involved, I mean, not real audiences, but larger audiences. And then my last question, and that was a question, and then my last question is, why haven't they shut it down? Because Orban could do it. I mean, you don't shut it down, you squeeze it down.
Well, I mean, it's a very good question. I mean, part of it is like how much with a large scale war going on right now, how much money are they going to invest in continually shutting down this theater, especially when this theater kind of like pops up weeks later again. But also the Teatr Doc, they are not allowed to be anti-war. So they're not immune to that law. However, they continue to write plays that are about other actual social issues that state-sponsored media won't report. And, maybe by having signs that are not that loud or visible and sort of taking place, literally in basements, it's still like enough off the radar. But another thing that I wanted to say about your point on an audience, an informed audience, like getting it. Their Teatro Doc is still very bold, and I'm actually wondering why one particular play has not been banned yet. So even though Teatro Doc cannot speak directly against the war, no one can. As of this year, they put on a play that is mainly, it's sort of like it's shrouded in deep historical material about Stalin and the burial of Joseph Stalin. The play is called Как мы хоронили Иосифа Виссарионовича, How We Buried Joseph Vissarionovich. And so essentially an informed audience knows that the play is asking, like, why to this day in contemporary Russia do we still have a tyrant as the leader? Like, that's, an informed audience gets that. But yet there's like so much documentary historical material about Stalin himself that it's sort of in like kind of like an Aesopian way, is kind of getting at a different mainstream idea. So it's bold. It's bold that they're doing this.
What not attack. What he would do is have a construction team working on the road right by the theater.
Oops.
He would have a big theater production happening, something very exciting happening with discounted tickets at the same time somewhere else, so that it just squeezes the life out of that theater. I think that Putin could do that.
He could.
He's obviously not doing it.
It could get worse.
It's fascinating. I see we have another question, and it maybe builds on this. I just want to say, actually, have you, either of you, again, are there comparative studies or looking, again, beyond the region, right? We've got the former Soviet, former socialist region, but have you looked at other, like Latin America or other areas where there might be a comparable and then comparable approaches or different approaches to squeezing something out?
I mean, it's always, to me, it's always felt like the form of theater that is the most living on the edge. Because again, as this verbatim technique was finessed and actually moved into mainstream in UK, in England, in London, I mean, that was developed in order to put on the stage stories about people of all different classes from society. But like in Russia, when they use verbatim and they put the truth on stage, like there are repercussions for touching the real in Russia. It's a popular movement in Germany. You know, it's not risky business. In UK, it's not risky business. But yes, in authoritarian regimes and post-authoritarian regimes, it's dangerous. In Hungary and in Belarus.
They just don't make it, and it's not dangerous.
And then and just one follow-up point, in Belarus, it is still going on there at Belarus Free Theater, but the directors of that theater, they're actually in exile in London, where they can safely direct performances through Skype and through Zoom with their actors in Minsk.
There's a question in the back.
Is there any coordination among basements? So if the latest play gets put out about something super topical, might it appear in multiple places simultaneously?
Yeah, I mean, it's mainly what is performed. Many of those that are performed at Teatro Doc, they will get onto the radar at Kiev's Theater of Displaced People. They might not be staged there, but at least at like festivals, workshops. There are a lot of festivals between sort of at this triangle between Belarus Free Theater, Ukraine Theater of Displaced People. But that's a really great question, in that like they're all very aware of what they're doing.
I was thinking in Russia, to sort of,
Oh, within.
poof, there goes that message, is broad at the same time as
The docudramas are performed elsewhere throughout Russia, not just at Teatr Dok. And then even, for instance, a few years ago, Moscow Art Theater, in their studio, their training for young actors, they actually had a master class on verbatim. But that is no longer happening, not since the war. But it is a sort of a flagship theater, Teatr Dok, and then other more progressive. There's a theater in St. Petersburg, Teatr Post, where there are several performances that originate at Teatr Dok that go up to St. Petersburg, and again, like a lot of collaboration there between them. So it's like, most theaters are mainstream, and then there's this kind of avant-garde underground that is here and there. Thank you. Good. That's a great question.
Oh, thank you. Other questions, and also for our online audience, please feel free to submit your questions by Twitter, email, or the Facebook page. Yes.
Yeah. So, obviously, this is not a recent phenomenon, but in light of the war in Ukraine, to what extent has Putin tried to close down these various types of plays and so forth and docudramas? And clearly, a play on Beslan would be highly political for very, very many reasons.
In light of the recent scandal around Zhenya Berkovich, who she's a student of Kirill Serebrennikov. She herself is very familiar with Teatr Dok, and her colleague wrote a play that is about women, and I'm not going to go into the detail because that's a project that I'm also looking forward to focusing on later this summer. But essentially, it's about women falling in love with ISIS soldiers. And then this is performed in Russia, in Moscow. Zhenya Berkovich is the director. And so it was either the play itself and the performance, or it was her anti-war poetry that she put on Facebook that got her arrested, and her colleague who wrote the play. It's been since last summer, if not October of last year. Then in May of this year, there was supposed to be a decision, but they remain imprisoned. But as of May of this year, they have been criminalized and accused of being terrorists. In my opinion, I think that there is a strong connection between Kirill Serebrennikov and Zhenya, because he was made an example of under his house arrest. Kirill had created several films and had grown internationally quite well known, and some of his films critiques of Russia. And so he was under house arrest for 2 years, freed, and now he's staging work in France. And so I think that by now doing this to his student, I do think that there's a connection, and like Russia can make examples of certain artists. And I think that maybe sort of you're going back to the Hungary question of like how an authoritarian regime reacts, is that like they don't have the time or the energy to like track down everybody. I'm really hoping Dortmund will be fine. But I do think that they pick and choose, and that they make an example of certain playwrights and theater directors in order to keep everybody in sort of an equal level of fear.
Thank you. We have a question from our online audience, from Kelly Smith. To what extent do Belarusian and Russian playwrights draw on the documentary and montage work by Svetlana Alexievich?
Ooh, that is a great question. Okay, so that is such a great question. So this is actually like some of the thing that's like guiding me in my second book project, which is actually focusing on Alexievich, because her style of documentary is very, very similar to what the Théâtre Doc guys do. But they are writing in different circumstances and at different points. Alexievich starting to use her own methods in the 70s and 80s. Théâtre Doc using similar methods, but also gaining influence from the Royal Court Theatre. So no, I don't think that Alexievich is sort of mirroring or copying anything from Théâtre Doc. I don't think that Théâtre Doc is mirroring or copying anything from Alexievich. But when you're writing in the genre of documentary prose, there are certain natural overlaps that appear when you're a writer who is focused on documenting the real and creating a social message. So what both the playwrights and Alexievich do is, that they will conduct people from these different social groups. Alexievich, women in particular, female veterans, women who have lived through cataclysmic events like the war. Playwrights at Théâtre Doc are looking mainly at people who live through human rights abuses and other injustices. And the interviews are very long, and then the playwright or Alexievich will only keep certain segments. Alexievich has even she might even keep like 3 words from a 3-hour-long interview, and then she curates it and puts it sort of in a logical sequence in order to make a social message. With Théâtre Doc, it's very much about sort of picking at least two different sides of a political issue in order to confront the audience with an opportunity to solve a problem. But thank you so much, Kelly, for that question, and I could talk a long time about that topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions from our audience, in person or online?
So this is a unique project because it really is kind of dealing with the unexplained or the unknown issues of how Russia turns to politics and can become political, even in the environment today. So how are you going to be able, or how are you trying to kind of publicize this important work? Because it allows people to have a different impression of Russia. And I think it's an important one because when we dismiss kind of dissidents and so forth in Russia, you have basically been able to find new paths and new ways to actually change Russia itself. That's the question.
Thank you so much for that question. I feel very comfortable with my book coming out because it's paper form. I am a little aware. I'm very much aware that this is going public online, and with the Zhenya Berkovich case, it's really careful what you have put online. And so, ultimately, my goals for this project is to. I don't really need to put any particular. I'm not looking to put anti-war messages on this platform. I'm not really looking to put it into a danger zone. But if Théâtre Doc can continue to exist by bringing attention to real social problems other than the war in Ukraine, and if that theater is continuing and these people are safely gathering there, then I think I'm going to be fine with this platform. I do really like that it's the platform shows a mix of different topics, of different social topics, and I really like that it's a pedagogical project. I can use this in my Intro to DH class that I teach about what exactly is a digital humanities project. I can use it in my post-Soviet performance classes. I can use it in my language classes. And I really do feel like I mean, in the past when I've presented, folks ask, okay, so where can I see the performances? Where can I see them? And so I really wanted to be an archive so that people can see these important performances when it's just so difficult to go to Russia today. I want other artists to use the platform themselves. I want people in Russia to use it so that they can see what other artists are doing who have a similar social message. And as I've been gaining material, I've actually gotten a lot of support from the artists themselves. And I was worried that some might be hesitant, but overall people are very pleased with this project, and like I've been getting a lot of thank yous for it. That like finally something like this is there.
Any final questions anyone has? Do you have a question, sir? Okay. Well, I think we are at about time.
Okay.
Any final comments you want to make, Susanna?
No. Well, I mean, if anyone would like to contribute to this project, that's the other reason why I like to present it. There is a particular category here that is on performance art that I would like to populate more with. I'm looking for essays that are about 1 page long or 2 page long. If you're in Eastern Europe over the summer or recently, and if you have seen an intriguing performance art at a museum or outside of a museum that you think has a social message in it, maybe to protect the environment, or maybe to bring attention to issues of discrimination, if you think it's a well-created piece, and if you'd like to write a very short review about it, I'd love to collect an archive, add it to the archive, because that's sort of one of the neat things about this digital technology is that I can actually show scholarship as these performance events happen. So if it's a published anthology, say that comes out in 2015, I find that those can become quickly dated, but here I can update this site as performance art is being made. And then finally, it's just really hard to get good color photos in publications these days if they're printed. And so another great thing about digital technology is the ability to show some really beautiful, vibrant images that represent the artistic and political significance of the performances.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Susanna. I think we should.
Well, thank you.
I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon, and I again want to thank the Department of State's Title VIII program for their support. So we look forward to seeing everyone again soon.
I so much enjoyed that.